This installment of the Anguilla Financial Services Commission's FinTech and Compliance webinar series was recorded on location at Tranquility Beach in Anguilla, British West Indies.
TRISA, the Travel Rule Information Sharing Alliance, has emerged as a leader in digital asset compliance space. TRISA is the collaboration of virtual asset service providers, regulators, non-profit agencies, and other parties working towards the development of protocols geared towards AML-CFT compliance, including the FATF Travel Rule. This episode is part 2 of our interview with JJ, or John Jeffries, who is of CipherTrace and is the chairman of TRISA. He has a vast experience in cybersecurity, cloud applications, artificial intelligence, blockchain technology, and is also a serial entrepreneur. I'll interview him in what hopefully will be an exciting and energetic interview regarding the opportunities and challenges that lie ahead in the space for TRISA to apply their innovation and leadership for financial services. Thank you for joining me, JJ.
Thank you for having me. Great to see you, Simone.
Great to see you too, JJ. So JJ, TRISA is an initiative that was born out of CipherTrace. Tell us how TRISA has evolved and how this initiative took on a life of its own.
Sure. So as you know, in February of 2019, the FATF proposed a risk-based approach, and part of that was the funds travel rule. And we saw that as both an existential threat to some components of the cryptocurrency economy, and also a tremendous opportunity to really help see the industry flourish. And so, we felt that by embracing it and delivering a solution that leveraged security. And so, as I said in the last call, the heritage of most of the members of CipherTrace are deep in security. And so, when we looked at the challenges presented, we thought there was some very basic and standard security components that could be applied to develop a very high trust mechanism to share this data.
So thank you for that in terms of telling us the genesis of TRISA. And I'm aware of a few of the working groups that have been established, having an opportunity to actually be a participant in one of those working groups. Can you tell us a bit about the work that is being done for the listening audience and the viewing audience? Sure.
So there's, the challenge that the travel rule presents is multifold, right? There is, the challenge of the exchanging of the information, which is, a message protocol, and there's some data layer language interpretation that needs to be done. But at a higher level, the challenge is really creating a trust mechanism that enables virtual asset service providers around the world to really feel like the due diligence on the counterparty has been done, and if they are sending confidential information about their customers, that it's being sent securely and to the correct place. And so we've spent a lot of our time focused on really developing the trust between the VASPs and helping address the sunrise issue, which is how do you start sharing when not everyone is sharing all at the same time.
And I think the sunrise issue is an important one. So for the viewers, again, who may not be familiar with that term, could you explain it for the audience?
Sure. So the FATF guidelines are simply guidelines. So each of the various different jurisdictions has to turn them into laws. And so there's not a firm timeline. There's an expectation that they will be done throughout 2021. We've seen some jurisdictions, half a dozen or so, already deploying those laws. But what's happening is there'll be an uneven deployment of these laws. So some jurisdictions will require it and others will not. And so the challenge with Sunrise is if you're in a jurisdiction that requires it, what do you do when your customers try to send it to a jurisdiction that doesn't yet require it? And how do you sort of raise the level so that everyone can start sharing at the same time or as soon as possible?
And I think that's critical because the issue of arbitrage is one that regulators are quite familiar with in terms of a challenge that allows for mass adoption that is necessary, and especially in an area for something so important as AML/CFT compliance. But as the chairman, so you've been the chairman of this group now for quite some time, and as the chairman, from its genesis until this point now, tell me, how has TRISA's work evolved more recently?
Sure, that's a good question. So I would say, there was the first period between the plenary in 2019 and the plenary in 2020, which I would say would be largely norming and forming stage for TRISA, where we're trying to gather a critical mass of people and gain a consensus around the approach, which is highly inclusive and very secure at the same time. And so we've been able to bring in a large number of really influential players and stakeholders, both from the industry side in terms of VASPs and technology providers, but also regulators. So we wanted it to be a venue where everyone could come to the table and have a say and express their needs and try to understand the other party's needs. So we've developed a community in the first 12 months. We developed some original source code. TRISA, some of the core tenets are around being an open architecture and open source. So we've released the code. And really, since we've gained traction, we've really accelerated the development of that code. But we've also implemented some core, what I would call critical infrastructure to enable the trust and enable the Sunrise Rule. So CipherTrace, my employer, has donated a certificate authority to the project, and also what we've done is we have seeded the VASP directory with data on over 800 VASPs, so that as people are coming on board, they can very quickly look up the correspondent VASP and see where it's located. So I think those two capabilities, the VASP directory and the certificate authority, are key components. And we've extended the process for what we call extended validated certificates, or extended validated VASP certificates, to really have a verification process performed by an external party that verifies both the legal identity, the jurisdiction, the travel rule requirements, and the AML/CFT processes deployed by that VASP, so that a VASP can go to our directory, look up a corresponding VASP, and make a risk-based decision about whether or not they want to transact with that VASP.
Now, you mentioned a few touch points there that I think are useful to come back to. One of the things that regulators have had to come to grips with is that in the digital asset community, there is definitely a sense of community and togetherness when they are for certain initiatives. And in that regard, do you find that sense of community has actually helped the work of TRISA?
I would say it definitely has. And we, as a company, we care deeply about personal privacy, and that's one of the characteristics we really wanted to imbue in the solution, and I think that really has helped foster the sense of community. When we ran our conference back in the days when we had physical conferences, I organized a panel of privacy coins. So I had the privacy coins represented on one of the panels, as well as the privacy advocates. So the Electronic Freedom Foundation, for example, participated in it. So we really wanted to make sure that everyone felt like, even if they didn't agree, that they got to hear, what law enforcement was thinking, what regulators were thinking, as well as, what the industry was thinking. So I think we've been able to build a good sense of community, and, we have a weekly call, which is highly interactive. And so I think, it continues to build the community, and every week we have, several more people participating in the call and joining in.
Sounds excellent and sounds quite progressive and open. So you mentioned open source code, which I think is really important in today's environment so that people have transparency in terms of the coding behind certain programs and platforms, but also respecting people's personal privacy. And it's one of the things that as regulators we've also had to grapple with. In terms of the TRISA initiative that would bring about AML CFT compliance in a more meaningful way with virtual asset service providers, can you touch a bit on that in terms of ensuring that the end user or the ultimate customer's privacy can be respected for cross-border transactions in the first instance, and where that would not be applied?
Sure. So that's a tricky issue to a degree, because at the end of the day, the data is going to reside at the various different VASPs, right? So the thing that we can do at sort of a foundational level is assure the integrity and the confidentiality of the information. So to make sure that the information is going to the right place, and while it's in transit, it is safe. There are other initiatives that we've been working on to help deliver more comprehensive privacy solutions to end users, but they would require regulator endorsement on a jurisdiction by jurisdiction basis. So for example, we're looking at options to use zero knowledge proofs or split key encryption to split up the data, and thereby provide the end users with a greater degree of privacy.
Sounds great. And definitely topical in the ambit of FATF. And I do think it's important to touch on the work that you've been engaged with FATF. You've mentioned the 2019 and the 2020 FATF plenary. What do you see as the future for your engagement? And to take it a step back, how did that engagement with FATF, such a prestigious body, start? And then where do you see it continuing into 2021 and beyond?
Sure. So, I think very early on, we wrote an influential white paper, the Travel Rule Information Sharing Architecture white paper, which we've since revised several times. That, I believe, garnered us the attention of the FATF. Originally at the meeting in February, Thomas Harjono, one of our board members, suggested the use of PKI infrastructure to address some of these issues, and that was part of the inspiration for the white paper that he's now a co-author of. So we're able to demonstrate thought leadership in terms of being able to really firmly identify the VASPs and help perform due diligence on them. And so I think what we got to was some of the heart of the issues that the FATF was concerned about, not just the transmitting of the data, but sort of the underpinnings behind it. And at the same time, as a leader in blockchain analytics can play an interesting role in both compliance with the travel rule and helping mitigate the risk associated with these transactions. And basically, we're invited.
And that's hard to achieve if you are in the private sector. For FATF plenary invitations, it is highly sought after. And so in the race to adopt and integrate digital assets, what challenges have you heard from the virtual asset service providers, or have there been any challenges?
Oh, they said it was impossible, which we knew not to be true, right? And when I speak to the folks in the U.S. Treasury and other regulators, and we show them, our proof of concept and how the architecture works, they all say, we knew it was possible. So that, that's the big difference. It's really, in terms of understanding the components and how they work, it's really stuff that we've all been using in cybersecurity and e-commerce for decades.
And I think that experience can definitely prove to be valuable when you engage with regulators, as I know you are, and increasingly engaging with regulators. But How can regulators in this space pivot from the old adage of trust but verify to working and regulating in a zero trust environment?
I believe in verification. And so, I don't necessarily believe that this regulatory environment is a zero trust environment. So what we're trying to do is, in essence, enable both the industry participants and the regulators to a degree outsource that verification process, right? So we've worked very closely with Global Digital Finance to modify the Wolfsburg questionnaire, which is a questionnaire developed for correspondent banking to establish trust between banks, and created a subset of those questions that we apply to VASPs, and thereby allow them to trust each other even though they've not yet met. So that's how we're trying to establish decentralized trust.
And I think that was an important question to ask, because it's one of the things that has come up as a question from regulators who are not as in depth into the digital asset space. As a regulator myself, one of the things that is very important is that the framework or the protocols in the case of a lot of virtual asset service providers can be understood and risks can be measured, and that there is some scrutiny to that. So thank you so much for that, because I think it's important for regulators to also understand some of the modalities within the space. So JJ, what value do you see from smaller regulators in international financial centers such as Anguilla offering to projects such as TRISA and other work that may be taking place within the wider CipherTrace group?
So that's a great question. I think, as I said, there's a lot of interest in privacy and promoting that. So being able to provide a sandbox, a secure environment that we can experiment with some of those modalities for privacy-enabled travel rule compliance would be of extreme benefit. And then we can, demonstrate to the other regulators in various parts of the world how we've achieved, both compliance and consumer privacy.
So it sounds as though a nimble and agile regulator could assist the rest of the world in terms of seeing what can happen within the digital asset space as it relates to new innovations or innovations that exist, but there's a lack of global comfort from the regulatory community.
Absolutely. I think the larger regulators have a very difficult time moving at the speed of crypto.
It is difficult for all regulators, but I think that regulators are increasingly recognizing the need to become more agile. So with all of that being said, JJ, is there scope for greater engagement from the regulatory community with that of the digital asset community in the near future or going forward?
Yes, absolutely. I think, as a regulatory community is translating the FATF's guidance into law, I think it's important to collaborate increasingly with the other stakeholders, including the VASPs, so people can understand the various different trade-offs, and people can, cooperate at the same time, come to terms with some things. For example, whether or not regulators are comfortable with batch processing of travel rule, which I know is something that the industry cares deeply about, but may not be, reflective of the guidelines.
And I think that is one of the modalities that regulators will have to come to grips with. Because of the volume and the speed, there is a need for looking at things that allow for the industry to have access to regulation, to be regulated, while they maximize on the things that have made them profitable and innovative and bring them economies of scale. So I can definitely agree with you on that. And so from that perspective, could you speak to some of the capacity building exercises that regulators, or just generally financial services providers who may not be as familiar in the cryptocurrency space, some of the resources that they can use to help build their capacity?
That's a great question, Simone. So my team produces a quarterly report on cryptocurrency regulation and crypto crime and trends. It's highly recommended. It's hosted on the Europol and Interpol websites and required reading by numerous regulators. So it's really intended to be an informative document. We also are producing reports around different risks in different parts of the world and different parts of the ecosystem. We offer training, so I recommend training in cryptocurrency. So we offer both a certified examiner training and custom training for groups. We recently ran a webinar series for government officials. So that was a 4-part series that was really tailored to the issues that a regulator or an enforcement officer may face.
And I think that's critically important because the space, as we've discussed, is developing so far and so fast. Well, JJ, at this point in time, I don't know if there's anything you wanted to close with. This has been truly a valuable discussion. I think would help to highlight some of the issues and some of the developments, the positive developments that are happening in this space. But I'll give you the last word.
Sure. I would encourage any stakeholder, a VASP, a regulator, to get involved with TRISA, to get involved with the working group calls. And if you're a VASP, to join the testnet and start your journey to compliance.
Sounds great. Thank you so much for taking the time out to speak with us, JJ. It's really been appreciated.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I appreciated it too.
The Anguilla Financial Services Commission would like to thank the Travel Rule Information Sharing Alliance, TRISA, for their participation. Any references within this episode can be found in the links provided below. For more information on our FinTech licensed businesses, please contact us by email at innovate@afsc.ai.